All right, get ready, because today we're diving deep into something pretty interesting, going from Charlie Brown all the way to U.S. education policy.
Oh.
Wow. Yeah, you might be
Oh.
thinking, huh? But seriously, the connection is wild and actually pretty insightful.
Yeah.
So it all starts with a blog post by Dr. Howie Knoff. He's a school psychologist, and he's been working in education for years.
Hmm.
And he basically says that a lot of educators right now, they're feeling kind of like Charlie Brown, constantly dealing with changing rules and wondering if they'll ever catch a break.
It's a great analogy. And in the post, Dr. Knoff uses this Charlie Brown thing to talk about two really hot topics that have got teachers feeling stressed.
Yeah.
That OCR letter on race-based discrimination and DEI,
Right.
and then that whole debate about how we teach about racial diversity in schools.
Yeah, those OCR letters really shook things up. But before we get all into the policy details, let's unpack this whole Charlie Brown metaphor.
Okay.
So you've read Dr. Knox's blog, all about Lucy pulling the football away from Charlie Brown. Have you ever felt like Charlie Brown in your own work?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I know, I have I'm ready to go with a project, and bam, everything changes last minute.
I think that feeling of being set up to fail, or at least to trip up big time, that's something a lot of people can relate to, not just in education.
Right.
But what makes Dr. Knopf's comparison so smart is that it's not just about feeling frustrated. He uses it to dig into the why, the motivation behind those actions, the Lucy, in this case, who he says is the Trump administration.
Okay, now I'm really curious. Tell me more about this motivation part.
Well, Dr. Knopf talks about what he calls the Trump administration's ready, fire, aim style when it comes to making policies.
Okay.
The OCR letters are a perfect example. That first letter they sent out on February 14th, it was like shooting without aiming. It caused so much panic and confusion among educators.
Yeah.
It took a really broad interpretation of the Supreme Court's decision on affirmative action,
Right.
and it almost made it seem like a bunch of DEI programs were suddenly in danger.
And schools were even threatened with losing federal funding if they didn't fall in line, right?
Exactly. It made everyone feel super urgent, even scared, pushing schools to make changes right away, even if they weren't even sure what those changes should be.
Right.
But then just 2 weeks later, the OCR put out an FAQ document that kind of softened things.
Oh, really?
They clarified that programs about specific cultures and heritages, those were still okay. And things like Black History Month celebrations, those were still allowed.
So it was like they fired first and then aimed, leaving everyone to scramble and figure things out.
Exactly. And that's what Dr. Knopf has a problem with. This tactic just creates unnecessary chaos and anxiety. It forces schools to be on the defensive instead of being proactive.
Yeah.
And it makes it so hard to plan for the future when the rules seem to change all the time.
It also makes you wonder, what's the real goal here?
Right.
Is it really about making sure all students are treated equally, like the OCR says? Or is there some deeper political agenda going on?
It makes you think.
Dr. Knopf doesn't really say outright, but he does leave us with some thought-provoking questions.
He does. And this is where that Charlie Brown metaphor gets really interesting, because it lets us think about the psychology behind these actions, like what's really driving them. Dr. Knopf brings in this analysis by Eric Schulmiller, who wrote an article about what Lucy's behavior in the Peanuts comics really means.
Okay, now this is getting good. Schulmiller actually suggests that Lucy isn't just being mean for no reason. He thinks her actions come from this past humiliation.
Hmm.
Remember that time Charlie Brown totally embarrassed her in front of everyone for not being good at football?
Oh, yeah.
Schulmiller argues that that event really stuck with Lucy, and it's why she keeps setting Charlie Brown up to fail. She's looking for revenge.
It's an interesting take. It really makes you wonder if we can look at the Trump administration's actions in the same way.
Right.
Like, could their policy changes, which seem so all over the place, actually be rooted in something that happened in the past? Some perceived slight or humiliation that's fueling their current approach.
I see what you're saying. You're not saying that they're out to get educators, but that their actions might be influenced by a desire to take back power or prove something.
Right. And Dr. Knoff actually draws a parallel to the 2011 White House Correspondents' Dinner. President Obama really roasted Donald Trump that night.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
People who were there said Trump was clearly upset by the jokes, even angry.
Really?
Could that public embarrassment have led to resentment or a desire to get back at people?
It's definitely something to think about. We can't know for sure what's going on in anyone's mind, but it's an interesting theory.
It is.
And it shows how important it is to try and understand the motivations behind actions, even if we don't agree with them.
Absolutely.
If we understand those motivations, we might be able to predict future actions and maybe even find ways to break out of these harmful patterns.
That's the hope.
So how does all of this relate back to educators who are on the front lines? They're the ones dealing with the fallout of these policy changes, the uncertainty, and the anxiety. What does Dr. Knoff advise them to do? How do they navigate this whole Charlie Brown world?
He knows it's easy to feel overwhelmed and like you want to just give up when it feels like the rug is constantly being pulled out from under you.
Right.
But he really encourages educators not to let that get to them. He reminds them that this ready, fire, aim approach, yeah, it's disruptive, but it doesn't necessarily mean big, immediate change.
Right, like with the threats about funding. The president and his administration can't just decide to stop giving schools federal funding.
Right.
There are checks and balances to stop that from happening.
Exactly. And Dr. Knoff really wants educators to remember that they have a voice in all of this.
Yeah.
They can contact the people who represent them in Congress,
Right.
tell them what they're worried about, and fight for policies that help public education and protect students' rights.
So it's about having that same resilience that Charlie Brown has, right? Even though he keeps getting tricked, he never loses hope.
Yeah, I love that.
He keeps believing that one day he'll finally get to kick that football.
It's about focusing on what you can control, even when everything around you feels like it's in chaos. And Dr. Knoff actually gives some concrete advice on how to do that.
Okay, I'm listening. What does he suggest?
He's got this three-part approach. First, he says, stay informed, but don't get caught up in all the hype.
Okay.
It's easy to get emotional and react to these tactics that are meant to provoke people. But it's important to step back, look at the situation clearly, and not make quick decisions based on fear or uncertainty.
So don't let Lucy control your actions.
Right. Yeah.
Got it. What's the second part?
Second, understand the limits of what the president can actually do. Like we were saying, the president of the Department of Education can't just do whatever they want. There are legal processes, and Congress has a really big role in making education policy.
And that leads to his third point, right? Get involved with your elected officials. Make your voice heard.
Exactly. Dr. Knoff wants educators to reach out to their representatives in Congress and let them know how these policy changes are affecting schools and students. Encourage them to protect funding for education and to support policies that promote equity and inclusion.
So it's about staying calm, knowing your rights, and taking action. I like that it's a proactive approach instead of just feeling helpless and reacting to whatever happens.
Exactly. And he goes even further, suggesting that educators look within their own schools and districts, find areas where they can make positive changes,
Right.
no matter what's happening at the federal level.
So even if you feel like Charlie Brown on the national stage, you can still be a leader and make a difference in your own area. That's really empowering.
It is. And it speaks to this idea that real change often starts locally. You don't have to wait for permission from Washington to create a learning environment that's more inclusive and equitable for your students.
This makes me think about that second fire Dr. Knoff mentions in his blog post. All the controversy around teaching about racial diversity in schools.
Yeah.
That first OCR letter almost seemed to say that any discussion of race or racism was automatically dividing people and basically toxic indoctrination.
Right. And that language really upset a lot of educators and people who fight for civil rights.
Yeah.
They argue that these conversations are super important
Right.
for understanding history, for dealing with the systemic inequalities that still exist, and for preparing students to be good citizens in a diverse society.
But then that FAQ document tried to walk things back a little,
Right.
saying that it was okay to celebrate different cultures and historical events as long as it wasn't discriminatory.
Yeah.
It felt like they were trying to be super careful, and it left teachers feeling unsure about what they could and couldn't do in their classrooms.
It did. And that kind of uncertainty can be really paralyzing.
Yeah.
Teachers might just avoid these topics altogether to be safe.
Right.
And that does a disservice to the students in the end.
It also sends a message to students of color that their experiences and their perspectives aren't valued or welcome in the classroom, and that's so damaging.
Absolutely. And this is where Dr. Knopf's advice about focusing on what you can control becomes even more important. He acknowledges that there are always going to be external pressures and political agendas.
Right.
But he encourages educators to stick to their core values and their commitment to providing a quality education for every student.
So even if you can't control what's going on in Washington, you can still create a safe and inclusive environment in your own classroom,
Exactly.
where students feel comfortable sharing their thoughts and having real discussions about race and diversity.
Precisely. And you can push for changes to the curriculum at your school or in your district
Right.
to make sure that history and current events are portrayed accurately and with more nuance.
It's about finding ways to push back against those limiting narratives, even if it's in small ways.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's about giving students the power to think critically
Mm-hmm.
and question the information they're given.
Right.
Help them learn how to analyze different perspectives, to recognize bias, and to come to their own conclusions.
You know, this is where I think the Charlie Brown metaphor really fits in again. Think about how Charlie Brown, even though Lucy keeps tricking him, never loses his optimism or his belief in fairness.
That's so true.
He keeps asking why things are the way they are and trying to find a better way.
Yeah.
It's about instilling that same spirit of curiosity and resilience in our students, teach them to question the status quo, to challenge injustice, and to never lose hope for a better future.
It's about helping them become the ones who make change happen.
Right.
The ones who finally figure out how to outsmart Lucy and create a world where everyone has an equal chance to succeed.
And I think that's the ultimate goal of education, right?
It is.
To give the next generation the power to build a more just and fair world.
That's a powerful message to leave our listeners with.
It is. But before we completely wrap up, I want to bring up something that wasn't really talked about in Dr. Knoff's blog, but that I think is worth considering.
Okay, I'm curious. What are you thinking about?
Well, we've talked a lot about what educators can do in this tough situation. But what about the students? They're the ones who are really affected by these policies, but their voices often don't get heard in these debates.
That's a really important point. We often talk about education as something that's done to students instead of with them.
Yeah.
But they have a perspective that's unique and so valuable.
Exactly. They're the ones who are living these policies every day, in the classroom, in the hallways, in their lives.
Right?
So my question to you, and to everyone listening, is this. How can we do a better job of including students in these conversations about education policy?
That's a great question. We need to create spaces where they feel safe sharing their thoughts and ideas.
Right.
Without worrying about being judged or getting in trouble, we need to really listen to their concerns and take them seriously.
And we need to empower them to be involved in shaping the future of their own education.
Absolutely. Give them a seat at the table. Let them be part of making decisions. Don't just talk about them. Talk to them.
And maybe, just maybe, they'll come up with some amazing solutions that we haven't even thought of.
I wouldn't be surprised at all. They're the ones living in this reality, and they're often the most creative and innovative in finding ways to deal with it.
Like we've been saying throughout this whole deep dive,
Yeah.
these issues are complicated. There are no easy answers.
Nope.
But one thing is clear.
What's that?
We need to change how we think about this,
Okay.
moving away from this top-down approach
Yeah.
and towards a model that's more collaborative and inclusive,
I like that.
where students are seen as partners,
Right.
not just people who have education policy done to them.
Absolutely.
And that takes us back to Dr. Knoff's call to action.
Okay.
He really pushes educators to stay informed,
Right.
to fight for change,
Right.
and to focus on what they can actually control within their own schools and classrooms.
Yeah, makes sense.
He also reminds us that this won't last forever.
Hopefully.
These ready, fire, aim tactics might keep happening.
Probably will.
But we can't let them stop us from doing what we need to do.
Right.
We have to hold on to hope.
They
And
have-
remember that Charlie Brown never gave up.
He didn't.
He kept believing that one day he would kick that football.
One day.
And maybe, just maybe,
Yeah.
with the help of the next generation,
I like that.
we can build an education system that's truly fair and gives every student the power to succeed.
That's the goal.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the Charlie Brown reality of race and DEI in education,
Yeah.
I want to leave you with a sense of possibility.
Oh.
Not defeat.
Right.
The challenges are real,
They are?
but so are the opportunities.
You got that right.
We have the power to make a difference.
We do.
And by working together,
Yeah.
we can create a better future for our students and for ourselves.
Well said.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Of course. It's been a pleasure.
And remember,
Okay, I'm listening.
keep questioning,
Will do.
keep learning,
Always.
and keep fighting for what you believe in.
That's the most important part.